that greater population. Thank you. This is going to be recorded. So being here is your consent for that recording. I also want to let you know we have closed captioning that you can turn on if you need to for accessibility. I want to go ahead and turn it over to the Seattle Schools team here, and they're going to introduce themselves and they're going to talk about what's currently happening around literacy in Seattle right now. Michelle, do you want to?
Yes, I lost my picture there for a second. I couldn't find myself. Hi, I'm Cashel Toner. I'm the Executive Director for Curriculum, Assessment, and Instruction in Seattle Public Schools.
Good evening. My name is Era Jackson. I'm the Director of Assessment and Instructional Improvement for Seattle Public Schools.
And I'm Kathleen Vasquez, Literacy and Social Studies Program Manager.
Okay, so we're going to talk tonight about three main buckets of work. First, we're going to start by talking about an overview of our systems work we've done around the science of reading. We're also going to talk about our early literacy screener, or our DIBELS implementation this year in Seattle. And then we'll also talk just briefly about some of the instructional materials and how we're using those with regard to foundational skills instruction in Seattle Public Schools. So for the first topic, I'll turn it over to Kathleen Vasquez to talk about some of the work we've been doing around the science of reading in Seattle Public Schools.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm so glad you're all here, and I hope we can just shed some light on what's going on and answer some questions for you. But I'll start with saying we were kind of doing science of reading before we knew it was a thing. And how that happened was when we moved to a curriculum adoption 6 years ago. One of the bigger agreements from teachers and families was we need work on phonics. At that time, we were just calling it phonics. We need more work there. And whatever we adopt has to have a more robust foundational skills component. So we set off knowing that that was a value that that we shared, and that there was some agreement. And so when we evaluated 10 different resources, the one we chose had a very strong and robust science of reading pedagogy built into it. But like I said, we didn't know that it was a thing called the science of reading. I would say a full year into implementation, started cropping up this around the country, science of reading, science of reading, science of reading. And we absolutely recognized, wow, we were really fortunate that the curriculum we adopted had that. Now, what I'd say to you is that was at the tier 1 general education level, our curriculum. I will be honest and say that our tier 1 K2 foundational skills work is really robust and solid. It does not have the advanced phonological awareness skills inside of it. So we started that. We started on that course of action. And then immediately, about a year in, people started to say, we need an intervention. And many of our schools had already delved into SIPs, which is an aligned reading intervention for our early readers. And that is completely robust with advanced phonological skills inside of it. And we started to utilize that for students who had some holes, right? Then science of reading really took off around the country, and we realized we better go back and educate our educators in what science of reading is and its alignment to our adoption and our selected reading intervention. So that's what we did last summer. Last summer, actually, at this time, we were training all of our kinder, first, and second grade teachers in the science of reading. And we received that training from Margaret Goldberg, who many of you might have noticed. She was quoted in the New York Times over the weekend asking Lucy Calkins to apologize for not being quite truthful, I would imagine. So our teachers, relished the training, and so we now have both the curriculum, the intervention, and we think a pretty solid foundational understanding of what the science of reading is and why it is so critical that students master those foundational skills so that when they hit third grade, they can continue to be successful on up. That's all I'll say for right now. And then anyone else can add.
Thanks, Kathleen. I think that was a really nice and thoughtful overview of sort of where we've been, where we are, and kind of forecasting to our next steps, because at the same time, there was a lot of work being done at the state level around, new expectations for school districts to select a universal screener and go through a process to make that selection. And then we went through some pretty significant training for our teachers. And then we've been in our first year of implementation. So to talk about that, I'll shift over to our new director of assessment. You should also know that Seattle made that shift. So historically, we've had a assessment manager, but over the last little year here, we've really built an assessment department with a director and then some additional staff in that space, because we recognize that that's a component of our system that really needs some intentionality and some support. So Era Jackson joined us from OSPI, which was delightful because she, guess what, knows a whole lot about the foundational skills screener. So I'll turn it over to you, Era.
Thank you, Cashel and Kathleen. So it's nice to see some of you who I've known for quite a few years in this dyslexia work. So this was really exciting for me to see this work come to fruition at the district level. And so as Kathleen and Cashel mentioned, Seattle adopted the Amplify DIBELS assessment. There's two options for Amplify on the crosswalk from OSPI. And this assessment really looks at the foundational skills that were called out in the law from 2018, and also has the RAN. And I'll say that the RAN that Amplify did produce is for two of the four criteria that is normed for the RAN. And we can have lots of conversations about the gold standard RAN and implementation. As I've said to people, it really needs to become electronic. It's very hard to test 12,000 children on paper pencil assessment. Around that. And so the screener has been implemented, and people are really finding it very informational, really just kind of digging into all the data sets that they have. With the RAN, as we have started seeing, the way the Amplify tool works is that you have to do the DIBELS measures of phonics, phonemic awareness, fluency, all of those pieces, vocabulary, alphabetic awareness simultaneously with the RAN, and that can trigger a flag that might show weaknesses associated with dyslexia or other learning disabilities. And as we continue to do that, what we're seeing is the numbers are right in line with all of the research that we've been studying for the past couple of years, of really showing that we have a very small percentage of students who have low working memory. And so how we're able to kind of parse out those students that we see low working memory, obviously also then low development in their emergent literacy skills, but that also is able for us to look at what is the intervention these students need, and then also what is the intervention that the students who have average working memory and are struggling with literacy development. So it's just become this awareness piece for us as the people who work, who have the global bird's eye view of the district. But it's also really informative for our educators. And with any new assessment, we're spending a lot of time thinking about assessment literacy. How do we use the data? How do we understand what we're looking at? How does it inform instruction? But I would just say that one of the pieces that we did is that my team and Kathleen's team met and were really thoughtful about what does this letter look like? And I know, and then I'll pass it back to Kathleen about the notification letter, but having lived in the law for a while, that piece of what is parent notification? What does parent communication look like? And knowing how important that is. And just Kathleen and I with our team, just really thoughtfully kind of be like, what should we put here? What should we put here? What are the responses? How do we want to communicate? And just being really thoughtful about what that looks like to and what does that look like as we're thinking about how to support our students. So I would say that's where we are right now. We're going through, we're going to start year 2 this fall. And I think people have learned a lot about the assessment. As always, when we implement something new, there's bumps and bruises, as we all know, and implementation dip. But people are really enthusiastic and they're really engaging, and my staff is crazy busy with all of the questions that we get, which tells me is that even though sometimes we're like, oh my gosh, I thought we explained that. If we didn't, they know we're here to support them and to support it and do it well. And every question, as I always say, is more information for us about how we can support our schools with doing that. I should also say that we also offer data analysis after we do the DIBELS assessment. So we've had opportunities for our educators to engage in understanding the data at a deeper level versus just trying to kind of parse through it on their own. So we're not just letting it lie out there and say, hope it worked out for you. We're trying to be very thoughtful about what does this information say and where can you go to next around that. And so I don't know, Kathleen, if you want to talk about more about the parent notification. I can't remember our agenda.
I'll talk about the parent notification, but I think there's a step that really occurs before that, because we didn't send out the letters until pretty recently. What took place before that, which I think is very important as part of our journey, is we created guidance documents to create consistency across our district with the way that teachers were seeing the data. In this work, it's very important to understand that there is a lot of interpretation of data that can be put in. And in order for our system to determine whether our strategies are working or not, we have to bring consistency. So one of the first things we did is we created what we'll call cut scores that allowed our teachers to figure out who's at grade level and above. The DIBELS will tell us that right away. It also tells us who's below grade level and who's well below grade level. But we felt it was really critical to validate those results. First year implementation of any kind of assessment may lead to the wrong conclusion, and we don't want to do that with our students. So we also coupled the DIBELS results with a placement assessment and used those two assessments to identify which students needed just general support, they're at grade level, which students needed additional support to fill in some holes here and there, and which students needed more of an intensive targeted intervention. And then we also created what I call an if-then document, which was designed to identify anomalies, right? Anomalies in the system, students who don't quite fit into the right boxes, but we want to make sure that we are providing our best thinking about where they are placed. So we, by grade level, had different situations that a teacher might analyze the data, look at the document and say, okay, here is what I'm going to do with the student. Here are my next steps. And it's backed by some common district thinking. So what I'd say is that we created a strong MTS system with tier 1 and tier 2, and I'd say tier 2 plus supports. We have not created the tier 3 supports. We felt it was really important to get tier 1 and tier 2 in place before moving into tier 3. And I know that Cashel has been in conversation with the special ed department to determine what those what tier 3 support will look like. After that, we were able to then create this letter that went home to families. And we did think long and hard with several people at the table in thinking about the letter. We wanted consistency. And we also wanted parents to have some ideas about what teachers are going to be doing in response to a student who is not at grade level, to give all parents an idea of what our system is recommending and what the teachers are going to be doing. And then we also sent out a family letter to give families some ideas about things that they could do to support their students, trying to meet the needs of the student from all angles.
So with that, thank you, Kathleen, and thank you, Era. I hope that gives this group an overview of some of the work we've done around the science of reading district-wide, and then that connection to the foundational skills screener, that how we've implemented DIBELS this year as a district. And then Kathleen was just getting to some of the MTSS work, multi-tiered systems of support, and she talked about our tier 1 strategies and then our tier 2 strategies. She also talked about our next steps to think about our tier 3 strategies as a district. We could also talk about, I think there was a question in the chat about how did those letters get to schools and how may they have come home? So we can talk about that. Eric, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure, sorry about that. So the letters went home through 4 students who did have that initial flag of when the DIBELS measures were assessed along with the rapid automatized naming of those. That we did send out letters to those students that had flags, and those letters are continuously being rolled out as we continue to do. We had new students, we have different pieces, so those are going out. I will say that, as always, whenever we talk about one measure, that was one measure that we had that we really wanted to use. I would also say that you know, the assessment is there, and as Kathleen said, it's worked in conjunction with another assessment, also with classroom observation and all of those people. So if your student was does do well on the rapid automatized naming and is at or above grade level development, they may not have received that flag. And so we may not have sent that letter home. And again, I want to just remind everybody, the screener is a screener. It is not a diagnosis. It is not a saying, yes, your child has dyslexia or a possible reading disability. It's really just saying, hey, this is letting you know that this student possibly has weaknesses associated with dyslexia or other reading disabilities. Pay close attention, look at what are the interventions that need to be provided, look at what else is happening with them, look at the full picture. It's supposed to give us a full picture around how a student is developing. And that's why we do it. That's why we do it 3 times a year, which I did put in the chat. I don't know if, I don't want to overstep, but if anybody wants to explain rapid automatized naming, or I can give it a go. is rapid automatized naming is, as everybody will kind of say, it's one of the pieces that was really called out in the state law. That really kind of looks at how students, what is a student's ability to recall familiar objects. And we know the gold standard put out is that it would be letters, numbers, colors, and objects. And I know that the Dyslexia Advisory Council at the state level is working on identifying more tools that have it available right now. There's only one publisher that I'm aware of right now that does all four of the criteria. And so when we say that it's looking at the ability for our student to be able to quickly recall things, we're really looking at that working memory, because if that is weak, then it's very hard to be able to identify letters, be able to remember sounds, and to be able to do those things. It's not complete, but it does give us a really good snapshot of where our students are and where they're developing. And as always, we'll say that, you know, for any learning disability or specific learning disability, there needs to be a lot more than just a screener that needs to be administered. There needs to be a lot of details around evaluation and all of those people that goes way beyond our gen ed teacher and our interventionists. The RAN is given, the RAN is not something that can be remediated. And the idea is that it's given in January and in first grade, in first grade and kindergarten in January. And we are following the recommendations put forth by the Dyslexia Advisory Council. Let's see, I didn't know if there were any specific questions. Let me see. Copy of the letters. I'll defer to Kathleen's team on those letters. Yes, I will do that. I'll pause there.
I think at this point, we've kind of given everybody a pretty big overview, and I don't want to take up too much of your time tonight. It's already 7:25, and I know you have other agenda items. So I'm thinking, I wonder if Heather could help us with, you know, if folks have specific follow-up questions and things, maybe you, Heather, you and I can dialogue about that and think about how we keep providing, you know, information and support to this community and, you know, continue our partnership.
Absolutely. We'll pass any additional questions that come up that are really, I think, district focused on Cashel and share that with you guys. And I know, you know, I know one of the things came up about the tier 3, like we were focusing on tier 1, tier 2, because the idea is with the interventions, we're trying to, one of the things in the law that I loved, it's to provide the opportunity to intervene before there's failure. And that's really it, because now we're, you know, the state is saying we need MTSS in all schools. That needs to be a part of this as well. And we're really trying to meet those kids where they're at and give them what they need when they need it. So the idea is we're not ending up in tier 3. We're getting services delivered as needed in that more general education curriculum. There might still be small group, there might be some things, but it really is general education. So I want that to be really clear, and that there are tier 3 programs in the district that are utilized. SIPS is sometimes intensified as part of a tier 3 intervention, but I'm happy to hear that that's something that's being looked at, and I think that that's sort of that next step as part of this implementation, and you know, just the continuation of work that's being done. And so you know, this is the first year, and I think we need to be understanding of that. And there's a lot of great work that's happened, and there's going to be more great work going forward. So I just really want to say thank you guys for taking the time tonight to come talk to us and give that very, that's actually a really big overview of a lot of different pieces that have been taking place. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll pass any additional questions on to you guys. Okay. And you're also welcome to stay and hang out for the rest of our conversation. So next, I would like to introduce Sarah Buteau. Sarah is, everything moved up. There you are. Sarah is the founding parent member of Decoding Dyslexia Washington. I consider her also a very good friend. And she, with ERA, I'm going to also say, was part of the creation of the Universal Screening Law, otherwise referred to as E2SB 6162. And she's going to talk about some of the tools that Decoding Dyslexia has been working on to support families having those conversations with their schools. If they get letters, what does that mean, and how to sort of have that conversation and understand the process that this new law is creating in order for families and schools to partner, again, to help prevent some of that failure and to provide as much intervention early for our students so they can be successful in their classrooms. So Sarah, I'm going to turn it over to you.
I am just locating the share screen. Make this bigger. So thanks for that. Really appreciate it. And that was great. This is Sarah coming from Seattle. It's a great update. I loved hearing about it and really excited to hear that teachers and your staff are really engaged and excited about this new opportunity to really advance their learning. So I have 2 kids with dyslexia. Both of my children are graduating in June from Running Start from high school and heading on to college. It has been a bumpy ride. And everyone who's here tonight likely is fairly new to this process. And so if there's anything I can say overall is that, yes, it probably does require more attentive parenting, but there is help out there and the kids will be fine, that everybody can breathe a little bit. So I was asked to talk about literacy advocacy and really specifically how it relates to 6162. So let's jump in and talk about that. So advocacy is really just the public support for or recommendation of a particular cause or policy. So in terms of what DD Washington does, it can be student-centered. You can advocate for your own student. You can work at the school or district level, or you can up it again and move on to the state or national level. DD Washington is primarily focused now at mostly the state level with everything that's going on right now, but we're very well connected with other advocates nationally. So to summarize what the law is, and I think it's important for everybody to have a good understanding about what is asked, what's called out in the law about what is compliance for your districts. There is a definition of dyslexia. It's basically adopted from the IDA, from a standard definition with a couple of tweaks. It requires universal screening in kindergarten through 2nd grade in these 5 areas: phonemic awareness, phonological awareness, letter sound knowledge, rapid automatized naming, or RAN. And it also asks for a family history question about, is there a family history of any challenges with reading or language acquisition? The additional components of the law that are also important are the section that asks schools to be transparent in their communication with families. Families need to understand if a child has ever been questioned of having a problem, and if so, families need to know about that early. So in the statute, they ask you to identify indicators and weakness, come up with an intervention plan, provide information relating to dyslexia on that initial letter, the communication to families, and provide that regular progress monitoring. Intervention is also required in the MTSS system with multisensory structured literacy by trained teachers. So it's great to hear that Seattle has embraced that they are training their teachers. It's a heavy lift. Given what's going on in the world right now and post-COVID. So I am super grateful, very fortunate to work with an amazing team of people, Freya Thorson, Veronica Smith-Kasem, Sam Ames, Eileen Hammer, of course, Heather. And Freya has been amazing and created these graphics that we thought would help families understand what the law is, how to pull information from their family out, and how to talk with teachers. So this first one was really just to explain what is the law. And up here you can see that it really is screening grades K through 2. So it's early screening. So I'm going to jump ahead a bit. Why? We get the questions often, why is it just K through 2? It was a great place to start because early identification and early intervention can really prevent any tier 3 or special education referrals. So we wanted to start there. Also, the teachers are more used to teaching foundational literacy. So we know earlier is better for identification and intervention. It's more effective. It's cost effective in terms of time and money. The brain is really ready. It's one of the highest periods in the brain's lifespan of plasticity or malleability, that you can change it and mold it and create neural pathways that can make reading much more automatic. We can avoid that 3rd grade wall and all of the social emotional fallout that comes with it. Waiting, as we know from research that's out there, waiting is not just you're behind in 3rd grade. The fallout from not reading at 3rd grade will follow you for the rest of your academic career. So we know that there's a lot of research talking about children who don't read by 3rd grade, that they have higher dropout rate, they have higher substance abuse, higher anxiety, higher risk of suicide, higher contact with the criminal justice system, and more likely, if they graduate and are not completely literate, their job prospects are limited. So it really is a large societal problem. And then further, it's the law. It's written in the law, so it has to be done. So back to this. The multi-tiered system of support, MTSS, is really a structural framework that schools are using to provide comprehensive support in a multidisciplinary fashion. So instead of it just being like the old method of using RTI, response to intervention, where we would focus on children who had an academic need and focus on that specific need, MTSS is a little bit different in that it is a preventative model, that it wants to identify issues early before they snowball and cascade and become this monster issue. So, and it's preventative. So that's the big thing. Schools are required by law to do that as of this year. The interventions have to be structured literacy. There's a huge description on IDA's website about what the principles of instruction are and what content areas are covered. It's related in every way to science of reading aligned instruction. So if you want to compare the two, what we talk about for an intervention for a student with severe dyslexia is really a science of reading aligned instruction that is more intensive and at a higher dosage. The content areas are very similar. So when we talk about aligning, what I heard Seattle talking about was aligning their core instruction with their intervention across tiers. It's that consistency where you're allowed the flexibility to increase the intensity and the dosage that works the best for students. You get the best outcome. So I'm really happy to hear about that. With the passage of 6162 in 2018, there was not a fiscal attachment. We were not allowed to, for that year, to ask for additional money for professional development, teacher training. It is the most important element of this. If the teachers don't receive the right training, they can't deliver the intervention with any kind of fidelity, and the student outcomes won't be as good. So we need to find a way to put that training in teachers' hands. We realize how complex it is with just the time post-COVID, financially, how much it costs to have substitutes come in when teachers, are doing training. It's complicated. But I can tell you that OSPI is working on that they're looking to create a structure where there can be some very cost-effective or free training that can be pushed out. I'm sure that you all in Seattle saw the article a few weeks ago, the 2 articles that came out with the 2 districts that are doing really well with teacher training, that have mobilized the resources that they have to require training. And they've done that in the early elementary years, and now they're started taking a second look at secondary, at middle school and high school. And I saw a question in the chat about what are we going to do about those the kids in that age range. And I can say what most schools are doing is intensively training their special educators, as those kids who are that far behind are going to need that kind of intensive support. I'm not sure what the answer is there. I know that there are a lot of conversations at OSPI about what kind of guidance we can provide for 3rd grade and above.
Sarah, I'm gonna jump in on that one too, because I do think it's also really important. Sarah is on the Dyslexia Advisory Council, and I'm on the what's called the SLD work group. And there's also a lot of work taking place at OSPI around MTSS and supporting schools in their implementation around MTSS. And I think that schools are really through these different processes. How are we going to identify students with specific learning disabilities? How does this MTSS work, especially as we move up into secondary? And we know that there are additional constraints with schedules and supporting students' needs with all the moving parts of a middle school and high school schedule. And so I think that there is work happening. Some districts are probably more ahead than others. And again, I think this is that continual work. We were able to get this piece in. There's more legislative pieces coming. And I think, again, having those conversations with your school district and keeping it open and trying to understand what's happening and sharing information about your own students' experience can also help inform some of these processes as they're being reviewed and that continual improvement process is happening.
Yeah, excellent point there. And I guess the little fifth element there was communication with families, that really transparency and the ability for parents to look at teachers as partners in this effort, for teachers to look at parents as partners, is really instrumental to the success for a child to really reach grade level when they've been struggling with reading. And there are lots of things that we can do. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But in the statute, it asks that the school communicate directly with students, families who have been flagged by screening, that what is their area of weakness? What is the plan for intervention? They're required to give information about dyslexia. Most schools have chosen to take some of the information from that was created by the Dyslexia Advisory Council. There are a couple of 1 or 2 pages that they often attach to that. And then to regularly communicate about that student's progress. So that's the basics of what the law is. So assuming you had a student who was screened and you received a letter, that student was flagged, what happens now? Well, the first thing we want to tell you is not to panic. As people talked earlier, it really is a good thing. We've identified an area of need and we can address it. So with the training that teachers are doing, particularly in Seattle, I think that they're making a lot of progress to address the targeted areas that we identify as potentially related to a student who has characteristics of dyslexia. So I think we should look at it as a good thing. Knowledge is power. I always say knowledge is power. The more information you can get, the better the decisions you can make. So what you can do at home, you can consider very carefully, very honestly, assess the strengths and weaknesses that you see in your child. Things that they're really good at that you notice. Are they really good athletes? Are they great artists? Are their motor skills good? What potential weaknesses do you see? If you give them multi-step directions, are they able to follow through? And you need to think about that honestly, because I think as parents, it's really hard to hear or to really evaluate your child that way. The other thing is to collect some work samples. Anything that has come home from school that might be raise your eyebrow and wonder what's that about. Collect all of that stuff. Sit your child down, ask them about their experiences at school. What do they love about school? What's hard for them? And what do they wish was different? And I can tell you, most of the students that I've ever worked with, they have very, very similar answers. They all love recess and lunch. They all hate the literacy section, and they're mortified when they're asked to come up and either read or do something in front of the class. So Decoding thought we would put something together that would help you sort of organize your thoughts about your particular student. So up here at the top, one of the first things is, do you have a family history of any of these things? And you guys can read through all of that. Why was that so fundamental to putting in the law? The reason that's so important is that we know that anyone who has dyslexia, their child has a 50% chance of getting struggling with dyslexia. A second sibling can have up to a 75% chance of also having dyslexia. So it's not just a matter of the statistics and what it shows us and how common it is. It's a way that we can use this family history to put inside an MTSS system and preventatively work with these students so they don't have to show us that they're failing at things before they require any additional help. So it really is an important piece of this puzzle. With that, the caveat is this is a difficult conversation to have. The Advisory Council has created some guidance to help educators have this conversation. You have to understand, if you're talking with a family with a student that's struggling with dyslexia, that the person you're speaking with may also be struggling with dyslexia. The shame and the embarrassment associated with that can shut down conversations. So I think there's a lot of work that we still need to do to increase awareness, to tell everyone that dyslexia is not related to intelligence. It occurs across the IQ spectrum, that it is a specific issue. We know how to identify it. We know how to provide interventions to support it. And it is not related to anybody's willingness or motivation at school. So if you can start a conversation setting that tone, then you might be able to get more information from families, and you might be able to release somebody from that stress and embarrassment that they feel about their school history. Some of the other things that you can think about with your child is this little section here is about signs and symptoms that you typically see in a preschool age child. You can go through it, you can check it off, see what is relevant for you. You can also go to the Yale Center for Dyslexia, the University of Michigan. Susan Barton of Bright Solutions has pretty exhaustive lists at the different ages and grade bands to sort of say what it looks like at the different age groups. It's amazingly informative if you want to go and look at the different lists and see what they focused on and how it might apply to your child. So here's that conversation you need to have with your child, how your child feels about these things, and how is your teacher reporting things about your child. And again, it is hard to look at this with a critical eye, but it's a necessary component to get your child the support that they need. So what do you do after you've done that with your student? You need to meet with your child's teacher, the classroom teacher specifically. You can ask them about the results of the screener, all of the areas that were assessed, ask them to share with you what that interpretation means and what their plan for intervention is. You can ask them about their core reading instruction, their interventions, and whether they're aligned, where they're in sync. How is the school doing with the screening? What screening tool is being used? Are the teachers trained? How do they monitor progress? All of those are really valuable questions, and we have another tool for you to use. So this is just a little list of questions that you can jot down some answers to as you're talking with your teacher, so you can try to collect your thoughts. The whole goal of having your little assessment of how a child is doing at home and how they're doing from the teacher's perspective, you need to bring those pieces together and they need to be integrated. You need to have a really thoughtful conversation with your teacher. You need to understand that this, and I'm not going to go through every single one of these questions, pretty much like the ones before, but you need to talk with that teacher about the plan for intervention. What is the plan? What is the intervention? Does it have a name? Can you research it? Can you look at it? Can you come in and see it in action? How long is the child going to receive the intervention, and who's going to be providing it? You need to define the parameters for communication. You know, what's the preferred method? Is it by email? Is it, you know, the teacher wants you to stop by every Tuesday at pickup and drop in and talk with them, and they'll show you some samples. You know, how and when are decisions going to be made about progress? Is this working, or do we need to switch and do something else? You can talk to your teacher about things you can do at home to support your student. Audiobooks should be started as soon as you recognize that someone is sort of avoidant of text. It helps them develop vocabulary. It helps them understand how sentences are put together. It gives them a lot of background knowledge, and it's entertaining. So it's definitely something that should be in everyone's arsenal. I'm not really sure if Seattle has contracts with audiobooks with even Learning Ally, but Bookshare is something that you can get for free through special education services, and I think other support services. Video support, which I think a lot of parents are initially pretty resistant to do, but you can align this with your teacher as you talk to your teacher. If your third grade teacher is talking about Washington State history, accessing that through a textbook is going to be challenging for a student who's struggling with reading. Try to line up some videos that they can look at, that they can still understand and learn from, get the content so they can contribute to conversations in the class, but they're not required to push through with that burden of reading being increased. You can find some games that they can play at home that reinforce activities or things that they've done at school. And by monitoring their home or their schoolwork, for the younger children, schoolwork will come home and you'll be able to look at it, and that can prompt some conversations and communication with their teacher. For the older students, you need to monitor that homework, primarily because home is really this is their safe place, and we need to protect it to a certain extent. Parents can't become the disciplinarian about you need to sit here and do your homework and complete it and for 3.5 hours. You need to talk with the teachers honestly and say, it's taking Johnny this long to get through his homework. It's pretty excessive. How can we cut this back? Can we modify the assignments in some way? And you always want to leave a meeting with the teacher when you're talking about a child who's getting an intervention with a meeting for scheduled follow-up. So you want to know when you're going to touch base again, whether it's by email or whether it's going to be in person. How is that teacher going to communicate to you how your child is, or how your child or student is doing? So local advocacy is beginning with the student's classroom teacher. It can move up to a principal or other members of that school community if need be, but primarily your focus should be with the classroom teacher first. They like you to follow through with sort of the hierarchy. If you're not getting anywhere there, then you can work your way up the food chain, but primarily that classroom teacher should be your first point of contact. If you're interested in moving up and doing more at a different level, you can send a letter to the director of teaching and learning, the director of curriculum instruction, who is at your district office. We have a template on our website of a letter that you can pull. You can download it, cut and paste it to suit your needs, that asks all these questions of the district about how is the screening go, what kind of instruction are they providing, interventions. It also references the 2 articles that came out of the Seattle Times. You can also go to your school board, present there. The Dyslexia Training Institute has a book, Dyslexia Advocate, that has a lot of model letters for you to use, and Rights Law also has an enormous number of letters you can use, particularly for special education to add, start first up. So as a wrap up, I would say to advocate for your student, you need to understand the law. What are the components of the law? What is the law asking for the district to do? And then you can start asking the district, is that happening? You need to collect information. You need to become a super sleuth. Knowledge is power. So the more information you can collect about your student, about what the district is doing, the more likely you are to get what you need for your student. I think we all need to appreciate that creating a positive partnership with your teachers and with your schools will serve you better. This is there's an explosive amount of information coming out about the science of reading, and I do believe that teachers are quite overwhelmed in our post-COVID world with all of the things that are being expected of them, and we try to show grace. With that said, we need to change some of our instructional strategies. We know that Chris Reichel agrees with that he would like to align early literacy with practices that are aligned with the science of reading. So we know that eventually we're going to get there, but it's going to take time to put all these pieces in place. Maintaining that effective two-way communication with your child's teacher. They should be able to call you and contact you with things that don't go well. You should be able to contact them with the things that are going well, but they should both be received with the same intent, which is we want to serve the student in the best way possible. And then after you've gathered all that information about your student and about the school, if you're not getting what you need or you don't know what to do with it, you need to reach out for some additional support and guidance. And where would you go? You can contact us. We have lots of people at Decoding who would be happy to help you. You could email us. You could message us through our website, Facebook, or Twitter. Or you can contact OSPI for some additional guidance. They have been very responsive to families who have called in and said, we're having issues with our school district. They will help guide you. They will talk to you about what that district's doing. Sometimes they'll actually call the district and interact with the personnel on your behalf. So, oh my goodness, sorry about that. I think that is all I have for the law. Heather, do you want to add to any of that? Do you have anything else you'd like to?
I have to unmute. I think that was really comprehensive. Advocating is hard, I want to say, but learning to have those conversations and being able to have those conversations is critical when you have a student who has a significant impact from their disability. I am a person with dyslexia, and I have 2 children with dyslexia, one who has a very severe dyslexia. I don't know, trying to find the right words. And you know, I found in trying to support her, I really had to educate myself. And it was really hard and I felt very alone. And it's one of the things that has brought me to the work that I'm doing now, to try to help support families and educate families. And these resources, if you feel you're struggling, I think are really meant to help provide some of that support and understanding so you can have those conversations, because it's hard when your kid is struggling. The school's doing their best to intervene, but we're not seeing that rate of progress that we would expect. So I hope everyone can really utilize the tools that have been shared tonight. And again, there will be links up on the Seattle Special Education PTSA website. We'll be posting this recording, and there'll be links to Decoding Dyslexia's webpage where all of these resources are. And I know it's also been shared in the chat. Sarah, I'm looking at the time here. We have just a few minutes. I want to honor everyone's time and everything, but I'm wondering, would you be willing to take some questions from the chat?
Sure, but let me just
Or
make
take
one
some-
other
if people
comment.
wanna
When we're talking
unmute
about,
and ask pardon?
sorry,
Or I was gonna say, if people want to unmute and maybe ask some questions in these last few minutes.
yeah, I'd be happy to take questions. One of the other things I just want to clarify is we're talking about parent advocacy here. The second
Yes.
component that is really just as important, that late elementary school, we need to help support our students, scaffold them, model for them how to advocate for themselves. They need to understand what their challenges are. They need to know how to talk to teachers, how to tell teachers what their challenges are, what helps them, and they need to participate in a lot of the meetings about them. So, you know, Kareem Wheeler said in the last literacy summit that, you know, nothing about us without us. So the students actually need to participate. They have a strong voice and we need to provide the opportunity to empower them to use it. So in terms of advocacy, that's what I would say.
Oh, and Christy just shared that we actually have the interpreters till 8:30. So that's wonderful. That I was worried they were going to have to drop off. So thank you. That's great. Thank you so much. So I'm gonna scroll through the chat here a little bit. I'm more than happy to have people, if they'd like to unmute and ask their questions, to ask their questions. I don't know, do we want to keep this slide up, Sarah, or do we want to go to more?
We can go back to your stuff if you want. I can just shut that down. There we go.
Okay. So
I would like to just remind everybody, just share with everyone, you know, I've been on the Dyslexia Advisory Council since 2018. I have worked with a lot of people from OSPI during the writing and the lobbying and the implementation process with the council. And I will tell you that there are some amazing people at OSPI that are working really hard to make this happen, to provide the right guidance for districts, to try to get the right professional development out there. But it is requiring a sea change, right? I mean, it requires districts to be super cooperative and everybody to sort of be on the same page, that they want the same thing. And I think sometimes the law preceded what districts may have been ready to do, and it takes time for them to react to it all. So I've seen some questions that, you know, families are saying that their district is or isn't doing some of these things. It's coming, and I think they will start doing it. I just think that they don't have all of the support that they need or the guidance that they need. And so OSPI is working to send that out.
yeah, and I also think that there may even be pieces in some places, but it just hasn't been communicated enough to families. And so, you know, I know that there's people from different districts here as well. And so I know Seattle has been working on their MTSS system since Susan Enfield was the superintendent, because she was the initial person to sign that policy. So we're lucky in that our system has been being built out for a long time. I don't think that it's because it's not been mandated at the state. I'm not sure parents are as versed enough in what MTSS is and what RTI, which is a part, response to intervention, a part of MTSS. And so there's a lot of, I kind of, when I work with families, there's a lot of edu-speak, right? And there's a lot of translation needed
Yeah.
for understanding what these pieces are. And so you might hear a terminology and you think, oh, we don't have that at our school, and it might be there, and it's just not been as communicated in a way that it's really clearly understood. So I do also want to say that. All right, I see there's a lot more pieces coming into the chat. As a person with dyslexia, I'm going to say monitoring the chat is always a little challenging for me. So please bear with me.
So
Excuse me, this
Heather,
is
I know there's
Cheryl
been
Lynn.
some,
Oh,
pardon.
go ahead,
Cheryl.
Sherilyn.
Oh, sorry. This is Cheryl Lynn, and I was just going to offer to read some of these questions. I mean, we can certainly have people
Awesome.
talk, but then I can also read some questions. So maybe when after people have asked questions, if there aren't more, then I'm more than happy to read through them and ask some questions.
Okay, that'd be awesome. I know you sent me a link and I didn't have a chance to open it, and I'm trying to find it now in a lot of other things.
Right.
I do
It
see
looks
some
like we have
hands
one.
too.
Yeah, I was gonna say we have someone with their hands up. Do you want to just go unmute and ask your question?
Of course, thank you so much. My name is Jessica. I'm wondering, we have a second grader and it's approaching the end of the school year, and we've just received a recommendation that he be assessed. And we're really very mindful of that third grade wall, I think is how it's being referred to. And so everything that we're hearing is that there's no access to have him assessed until he begins the third grade. And so do you have any recommendations for those of us who are caught in this little in-between that we found ourselves in?
Sarah, can I jump in on this one?
It's your territory.
So, yeah. So if you guys have met and there's been a determination that your student is needing to be assessed for a special education evaluation, that's moving up to that tier 3. So that's great. There's been probably a lot of progress monitoring, a lot of information that's been being collected, and that hopefully has been shared with you.
Oh, sorry.
The problem is that enters a very specific separate set of laws, IDEA. And so schools have a set of time to do that. So there's, so I just want to make sure that that's clear, that that's separate. So there's usually 25 days to make a determination, school days as well, if the student needs to be assessed. And then there's 35 school days to complete the evaluation. And you're nodding your head, you're like, I'm aware of this. And it's really one of their, I think it's really important because I believe in being very pragmatic. COVID has not been kind to students who have disabilities.
Yeah.
And our funding, the funding method for getting school psychologists, if you were to look it up, it's terrible. This is the one that always blows my mind. So you get one psychologist for every 147,000 middle schoolers. Okay, there's 50,000 students total in Seattle. So that's the funding level, right? There's you get more in elementary and more in high school. The numbers are different, but we don't fund this enough. The staffing is overtaxed right now, and it's the process currently is slow. So if you just did this, it's going to be next year. But the great thing is if you've already made that determination, you have your consent, you've signed it, it's ready to go, that calendar time is starting, you're going to go into next year, you're going to hit the ground running with that evaluation, which is great. If you can do some private, intervention, or if you can do summer staircase, or if he's, I'm saying he, but they have some other things, you can possibly have some extra supports there. And then that IEP is going to be written within 30 calendar days. So while we have the school days for the other pieces, this becomes calendar days. And so hopefully you've that's been flagged at your school, and you're going to be able to hit that third grade running with those more intensive supports. And there's nothing preventing families from doing intervention now, right? You can, again, summer staircase is an option if you haven't talked to your school team about that. I'm guessing if they're thinking your student needs extra supports, that's a great way to get some extra supports this summer. But what's happening with SB 6162 and the universal screening is a separate piece from that federal the federal requirements.
Yeah, the one thing I might
does that
add,
help answer your question? Pardon?
can I add one thing to that? That,
Absolutely.
I appreciate where you are with staff asking for an evaluation. And I know it's kind of scary. But I will say gathering information from the school about what supports they are able to provide and in what setting would also be important information. Oftentimes, and I can't really speak to the Seattle schools because I don't know that much about them. I don't live there. But sometimes families think that accessing special education is the holy grail, that's going to solve all of your problems and that your student is going to be completely served there and everything will be great. And I would caution you, or anyone really, to really investigate what kind of supports are in place in the school and who is qualified to deliver them. You may want to have a reading interventionist or a specialist or even a para who happens to be highly trained deliver that instruction for your child in a different kind of setting, which I think, Heather, you can probably describe it. I think you can write all that in your IEP about how you want that to be. But again, you have to know that that's what you want. And so again, knowledge is power. You really need to investigate what could be provided in special education and do you really believe it's right for your child? And again, more conversations, but.
Hopefully the evaluation, they're going to drill down and so you'll have a better understanding of the methodology. And if they've been resistant to intervention, it allows you to say, okay, what are we changing and how can we be really, really deliberate in what we're changing, adding, or intensifying as part of those services based on the individual needs. Because remember, tier 1 and tier 2 is general education. Their work, it's not as individualized. Now, an IEP, an individualized education plan does not mean your student is still going to have one-to-one necessarily, but the goals and the things they're working on, this discrete specific skills you need to build, those are based on your students' individual learning profile, and you can really hone in and focus on those things. So if you really have a student who has a significant weakness in phonemic awareness and phonological awareness, you can really drill down and have those types of goals where that's really being monitored more closely and you're again intensifying those supports, right? So that's what some of the data that's been being collected will hopefully help inform, and what that response to intervention as part of an MTSS system, that's what it's that quantitative and qualitative information going in so we can have a holistic understanding of where that student's at.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, this is Cheryl Lynn, and I can go through these. I will say that a lot of the questions are around serious concerns, probably legitimate concerns about inequitability in terms of how the both the screening is managed and the dyslexia remediation. So will the letters go out in different languages? How or what training are Seattle's teachers attending? Which teacher cohorts are being trained? Apologies if you guys have answered some of this already. I've been working on this thing. And what about the older kids that we've failed? So language, training, and the kids who are already in trouble or hurting.
You want me to start, Heather?
Yeah, go ahead.
In terms of language, I assume you're talking about English language learners, that the English language department at OSPI came out with guidance about that, that students who were English learners we were to defer screening until they reached a certain proficiency level on the WIDA test, which was to assess their English proficiency. Since that guidance has come out, there have been a lot of conversations here. Part of it was at the Literacy Summit that OSPI sponsored. There are a lot of the experts around the country who are specialized, who talk specifically about English language learners and dialectical learners. And the guidance is changing. It's evolving. I can tell you that OSPI is open to those. They're receptive to have those conversations with those experts. But what I hear, and this, I'm not representing OSPI in any way, but what I hear from these experts is that we shouldn't defer the screening. We should go ahead and do the screening, but we use the information that we get from it in a different way. So it should help us inform some of our instructional decisions, but we should understand that English learners and dialectical learners have a language comprehension component that needs to be ongoing and amplified, that is not really part of what most students get in the gen ed setting. So I would like to say that those conversations are continuing and that the guidance may evolve over the next year or so as we talk more about really the different learners that we do have. In terms of equity, I think part of that was addressed, but I think that most schools are able to send out letters and communications with translations available. So I think if they're aware of a family speaking a certain language, they should be able to provide that letter to those families and provide additional support translation services at the district if needed. Heather, have you run into that for youth?
Well, I think I haven't heard of blanket translation and things, because I think that kind of what Cashel and the team with Seattle was saying earlier is they are trying to be very thoughtful and considerate about the letters. And I can pass that question along to Seattle and ask for an answer. And again, we have a law that is the floor, but districts can go all the way up to the ceiling and they can decide where that is. So I think when we're hoping, I hope that districts put that family communication and family-centered communication and student-centered decision-making around the needs to communicate that with the families. But I know that there have been pushes legislatively around communication to families, especially multilingual families. But I cannot say for certain there is a specific requirement like with an IEP that translation be provided in a family's native language on this communication specifically. So,
right. Well, in addition,
Sherilyn, go ahead, Sarah, go.
Sorry, I was going to say the flip side of the equity piece is not just communications, but it's also interventions already. And I can tell you, I've benefited from that. You know, my family had resources to, you know, for me to pay for training. Went to Canada and got trained, you know, could purchase all the things that I needed. You know, we spoke the language, was no barrier there. It was resource driven. And most people can't afford to pay for the private tutors that are required to provide really intensive instruction outside of school. It is required. It works for students with dyslexia, but finding it and paying for it is a whole nother thing, which is why many of the people who work with decoding would like to try to create that opportunity for other kids. It's really heartbreaking to walk into a class, and I think we can all pick out the kids who we know are struggling with reading, and we know what would work for them, but they can't get it in their school. I think we're making a lot of really positive steps. We're moving in the right direction, but we're not getting there fast enough for anybody's taste. I mean, we should have been there yesterday, but it is taking long. But we do have people who are having all these conversations. And I think for parents, I mean, continue to ask the questions at your districts, you know, ask your teachers, you know, if you're working with your PTSA, ask them if they have money and funding. Find some teachers who need the training, fund the teacher training if you can. Any way that you can bring this knowledge to a teacher in their practice, you're going to serve kids. So there was a question here in the chat about, is this an unfunded mandate? And it really depends on how you look at it, because there was the availability and the opportunity for schools to use LAP money to direct that money towards purchasing tools and training. And a lot of districts have done that. So no, they did not have a big price tag because we did not have the opportunity that year that the law went through to attach it. It wasn't a budgetary year. So we need to go back and look at it. Since then, school districts have had the COVID money, the ESSER money, and they've had opportunities to use that money in different ways. And a lot of schools have actually purchased training for their teachers with that money. And now there's some MTSS money as well. So there are some opportunities for schools to grab some money and to make those decisions if this is their priority. But if it's not their priority, then they'll make a different decision. Parents have loud voices. You need to use your voice if you can and say, look, this would be great for our school. We can see why it's important. How can we make sure our teachers get trained? We know that Chris Reichel, our superintendent, has said that we need to overhaul early literacy. Let's all get on that bandwagon and figure out how we can make that happen. It's working all the way across the country. There are other states that have done this. There are parents groups that have incited the questions, and change has been made, and it's only going to serve kids better. We've seen no change in our NAEP, in our National Assessment of Education Progress in like 20 years. We need to do something different. Too many kids are falling through the cracks. And as far as the older kids, OSPI is working very actively on guidance for grade 3 and above. It is more complicated than I ever dreamed. I'm not a bureaucrat, so I was in healthcare. But it is very complicated with all of the legal requirements and the block schedules and how staffing is set up from middle school and high school. They're working on it. I don't know what it's going to look like. I just know that some schools that are already doing, districts that are already doing it, are going to go and train their special educators intensively. So that's one way to solve that problem. It may not be the only way. It may not be the way for every district. But parents are advocates. Parents have a voice. You just need to know how to use it, how to amplify it, and who to contact. So again, go look at the templates that we have on our website to talk to your curriculums. Directors of curriculum instruction. And what was the other one, Heather? My mind is blanking.
I was reading something in the chat. Can you say it again?
It's just the name of the director of curriculum instruction, or what is the other? Different schools use different titles for that person. You can also just contact your school board and go and give a speech at the school board. They'll give you like 2 minutes where you can go and talk about something that is important to you. And if you are concerned about equity and serving children who have specific reading needs and they're not having their needs met, they should know.
The other thing that I think that, we're here as part of the Seattle Special Education PTSA, but a lot of us are also in the PTSAs or members of the PTSAs at the school level as well. And as Sarah was sort of talking about and having those conversations, if you're on your school's BLT committee, right, and you're on that leadership team, this is a great way to have those conversations with the other leadership members at your school. And if you're doing professional development and they're planning around that, that building leadership team can have some influence there, right? Decoding dyslexia, really, we focus on that state level, that higher up piece, but really this is a multifaceted problem. We've had the science of reading around for a really long time, but it's been slow to be fully embraced within the school system, and it's happening. We're seeing it. You're hearing about it more and more, but the more we can also influence at that school level and sort of come from it at another angle, I think that can help build momentum around getting students the appropriate instruction that they need.
This is Cheryl Lynn. Let me see if I can also get in a couple other questions. Definitely have had questions about older kids. Also, again, the risk factors are for those who don't receive assessment, mostly Black and brown kids was the comment. Let's see. How do we advocate for those who educate the educators and develop the curricula? Seems like teachers need better tools from the start. Why is the state not funding? So I guess the state not funding question was answered in the chat. Actually, Sarah, go ahead.
Yeah, we also have to look at what's going on with PESB, which is the professional
Standards Board.
educators. Yeah. And that is something that Decoding Dyslexia has also been advocating at that level and having conversations around what are the standards that we expect our teachers to know in their, that they're, when they're in their pre-service programs, when they're looking to become certified in our state, what are the assessments that are being used? Is it balanced literacy, or is it grounded in the science of reading? And that is something that PESB has been responsive to, and they are also looking at. So again, this is a multifaceted problem. And you're right, teachers need the tools and the knowledge base, and they should be getting into their pre-service programs, and they're not. And that is, again, something at the state level, there is work happening around.
But not
And
enough.
It's not enough, and it's not fast enough. So,
But I will say, if there are teachers here participating, listening, you know, your voices are incredibly powerful. For you to go back to your teacher training program and say, wow, I had no idea. I felt like I was prepared when I graduated, and yet I really wasn't until I got additional training. That reflects pretty poorly on that program. I mean, but your voice saying that to them actively, or organizing a group of teachers who have graduated from a program, really speaks volumes. The only other way to get at it is to change the certification from PESB so that the teacher training programs have to change their instruction to accommodate that. They can't risk graduating students to train who don't pass the certification test. So there are a lot of ways to look at it, but it's a complicated issue. Higher ed needs to be involved. The certification test is not current. We need to look at that. Teachers need the training. And right now you have districts and teachers who are shouldering that financial burden, which seems the opposite when you pay for higher education, when you pay for a bachelor's or a master's degree, or even a graduate degree.
This is Cheryl Lynn. You know, a lot of this, I think, in terms of, I'm seeing more comments that are also being repeated in a lot of the conversations that you and Heather are providing in terms of, I'll just say, I don't know a lot about dyslexia. I've learned a lot over the last year. It is clear that this is an enormous issue in this state, both the energy around the dyslexia events that we have held, and then seeing all these really totally pertinent questions, which are also some of the issues that we've had in discussions around the PTSA, just in terms of professional development. I mean, this is the second time today I've heard, why isn't that PTAs are involved in pushing for professional development? And I think there's a lot of what I'm hearing is also parents are a lot smarter in some of these areas, or a lot more knowledgeable in some of these areas than teachers or principals or administrators. Which is to say, both I'm glad to be a part of this, and also to put in yet another plug for joining the membership for the PTSA, because this is the kind of stuff that special education PTSA does. And if there is another question, I haven't, oh, let's see. Have you reached out to smaller cities to offer help and guidance? This PTSA?
Had that discussion today.
This was, yeah, I was gonna say, this was actually our leadership team's discussion this afternoon. We were talking about how can we improve that, and what can we do to support those really, really small school districts where there's maybe 50 kids and they don't have the same level of funding. And, you know, is there a way to provide scholarships for training? I'm sorry, I'm getting over COVID and I have a cough. And but can we do that, and how influential can that be if there was a way to make that happen, to provide opportunities for professional development that wouldn't normally be there?
Yeah, OSPI has been good about providing opportunities for professional development, and I would like to see them as a curator for the state to provide, you know, that would be your one-stop shopping, that you could go to the OSPI website, they could be connected to the PD enroller. We had this discussion today as well, that to make it easy for you to get the training, You know, likely it could be, you know, virtual. We wouldn't have to go anywhere. You would certainly need to do it on your time or your school time, but we could manage that and make it really affordable. There are a lot of people who are willing to provide some training to do videos for us and to speak even without a fee. And I think if we can harness that kind of energy, this is how powerful it is. This is how much these people want this knowledge in the hands of teachers, that it can be so life-changing. But I will also say that there are states that have done amazing things and it's still not perfect, that there are always going to be issues that we need to work through, that we need to find a resolution for. It's never going to be perfect. And look, the science of reading is a science, right? I mean, it's informed by current research. Some of the things that we know right now are also going to change. So it's not like we're all of a sudden going to adapt what we know now. We have to be open to how things might change as we learn more about how the brain works and what skills need to be taught at what particular time. And yeah, so Heather, anything else?
Well, and I also, I do want to give a shout out to OSPI and the training. And I know this was in the chat a little bit earlier. They have been providing a tremendous amount of training to teachers all over the state with, from Alicia Roberts Frank, who actually came and spoke last spring for us around this as well. She's also part of the Dyslexia Advisory Council, and she's just been, pardon me, I'm so sorry. She's been really working her patukas off, doing tons and tons of training. And we're really fortunate that OSPI has been covering the cost of that. So districts and staff have been able to access those classes and trainings for free. So there has been there is things happening for sure. Janice, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, this is Janice. I had a quick question. So the Seattle Times ran a couple stories a few months ago about the city of Wenatchee, which is a much smaller district than Seattle, and the success that they've had in Wenatchee in improving reading scores and in implementing science of reading instruction. And I'm just curious if you have any insight about the role that families and caregivers have played in the rollout in Wenatchee. And, you know, if you have insight about how that district has worked with families to, you know, what lessons can we learn, in other words, from the success in Wenatchee that might be applicable to Seattle and to other districts that might be represented here today?
That was the work in Wenatchee was done by Dr. Stacy Bain. And I might have to turn this over to Sarah just because I'm still recovering. And their superintendent. And Janice, that is a really great question about how they worked with families and how they communicated with families. And I almost wonder, that makes me think like maybe we should invite Stacy to come talk about it to our PTSA. She's a really great educator. Sarah and I have the pleasure of being able to collaborate with her on some of the work that's happening at the state level. And a huge piece of what was done in those articles were about the letter. There's a program called Letters, and it's for teachers to be trained in the science of reading. It's not a curriculum. It is the deep knowledge and understanding how students learn to read. So when a teacher is given a curriculum, they understand the components, they understand how to do error analysis, they understand what's happening with their students within that curriculum. And I think that's been, it's a really powerful tool because it really lets educators really be able to dig deep into what's happening with their students, but it also really provides them this level of competency and understanding that I think is really empowering. And I think teachers really love it when they get it. It's not a, it's a big lift to do that training and to get everyone trained. But what we're seeing in states and in districts that have fully embraced that level of professional development and training for their teachers, these are the places we're seeing those reading scores really start to take off. Mississippi was one of the first states to mandate it. And it is the only state right now that's currently seeing their NAEP scores significantly increase. I'm going to jump off really quick and let Sarah take over.
Let me think where I was going to go with that thought. That letters is a heavy lift. It's expensive. It's hard to schedule right now. It's considered the gold standard. If you look across the nation, there are lots of districts that are providing letters training to either K-2 teachers, elementary teachers. They keep amping it up. They keep adding more teachers on. It's fantastic. It basically tells the teachers why you need to teach the way you need to teach, why you need to address foundational skills. It doesn't, however, teach the teachers how to do that as much. So whenever you look at really successful models in other states, that there was usually another component that was equally as important, where you had teachers, administrators, I'm not sure, some of them were administrators, who actually served as coaches for the classroom teachers. And it said, look, let's go, we can co-teach this. I'll show you how to do this. I'll teach you how to do this, and then you'll be good on your own. It's a big jump going from a balanced literacy dominant district to structured literacy. It's a heavy lift, and it takes a lot of time, and teachers need support in doing that. And the places where I've seen it most successfully done are places where they've had a coaching model. Where, and here, if we were to do something like that in Washington State, there's been discussion about it being at the educational service districts, the ESDs, training staff there who could go out and support teachers in their districts. But there are a lot of things to think about, that just taking letters won't guarantee that your practice changes in such a way that you can make that difference, that there are other components as well. It's just like reading instruction is complex. There are a lot of things. It's not just what people think is phonics. So it's complex, but we need to figure out how we can provide the best support to teachers with the knowledge that we see is foundational to their education, in order to deliver the best instruction possible. You're right. I see in the chat here that higher ed should be providing that. The burden now, though, because higher ed has failed there, they haven't advanced with the science, that now that burden is falling on districts and individual schools, and sadly, a lot of teachers. I know, I can't even tell you how many teachers are paying for this for themselves. So if there is a PTA, PTSA opportunity to help provide that support for teachers, it's money enormously well spent. It's a great decision. The other thing is, if you are, I saw somebody said something about PTA. Last summer, a resolution was written, and Sam Ains, I don't know if she's here, could talk about it, about equity in education and how we need to really change instructional strategies, and we need to align it with the science and what happens when you don't. There was a lot of information about that. PTAs and PTSAs can use that document to advocate in their own schools. So I would encourage you, if that's something that you want to do, you can pull that document off the Washington State PTA site, read it, talk about it in your own PTAs, PTSAs, and see how you can elevate that conversation. There's a lot of really good data in there that you can use.
I want to do a time check. It's 8:30, and it's time for our ASL interpreters to wrap up. I want to thank everyone for attending and coming and starting this conversation. It is a conversation to have with your schools. There's a lot of work to be done, and there's a lot of learning from everybody on how we can make these improvements. And I just really appreciate everyone here. Again, we've been collecting questions and we will get those posted. along with this video up on our website, and as well as some of the resources that were shared here tonight. And I just want to thank our ASL interpreters. Thank you guys so much for being here. And thanks for everyone for joining us.
This is Janice, and I'm going to end the meeting now.